It's 1978. Detroit is quiet in a way it's never been before. No tire smoke, no roaring V8s echoing down Woodward Avenue, no kids racing between stoplights, just worry. The parking lots at GM headquarters feel different now. Executives walk faster. Conversations are hushed. Everyone knows something is changing. Gas prices are exploding. Emissions laws are tightening. And General Motors, the largest, most powerful automaker on Earth, is scared. For decades, GM had ruled American roads with confidence. They built what they wanted. Customers bought what GM offered. The formula was simple and profitable. But now, the formula is breaking. And in that fear, GM makes a decision that will haunt it for decades. They build an engine they wish they could erase from history. Most people think they know this story. They've heard the jokes. They've seen the memes. They think it's just another tale of 1970s incompetence. They really don't understand what happened. Because this engine didn't just fail. It shattered trust. It destroyed a brand's reputation overnight. And it changed how Americans looked at GM forever. This is the story of the engine GM regrets building and can't escape, no matter how hard they try. The late 1970s were brutal for American car companies. The muscle car era was dead, not dying, dead. High-compression V8s were being strangled by catalytic converters and low-octane fuel. The leaded gasoline that made big power was disappearing from pumps. Emissions equipment was choking intake systems and clogging exhaust paths. Overnight, horsepower numbers collapsed. A Corvette that once made over 400 horsepower was now struggling to clear 180. Muscle cars that ran 13-second quarter miles were now wheezing through the 16s. Performance enthusiasts looked at new car specs and laughed bitterly. The cars weren't just slower, they felt defeated. And then came the oil crisis. In 1973, OPEC imposed an embargo that shook America to its core. Suddenly, the country that had always had cheap, endless gasoline was rationing fuel like a wartime necessity. Lines at gas stations stretched for blocks. Some stations ran out entirely. Fights broke out between drivers. Odd-even rationing based on license plates became normal. Fuel prices doubled, then tripled, then kept climbing. Suddenly, Americans didn't want power. They wanted mileage. The shift was stunning in its speed. Dealers couldn't give away big V8s. Small cars flew off lots. Import brands surged, and European manufacturers, especially Mercedes-Benz and Peugeot, were cleaning up with diesel cars that ran forever and sipped fuel. GM watched this happen from Detroit. They watched market share slip. They watched customers walk into foreign dealerships. They watched the future arrive without them. And they panicked. Inside GM's executive offices, diesel became the magic word. Every meeting mentioned it. Every presentation featured it. Every strategy session circled back to it. Diesel engines promised 25 to 30% better fuel economy. Numbers that would satisfy upcoming CAFE regulations. Numbers that would bring customers back to showrooms. Long life. Diesel engines were legendary for surviving hundreds of thousands of miles. Taxi fleets ran them forever. Trucks lived on them. Massive torque at low RPM. The kind of smooth, effortless power that made highway driving relaxing. No need to downshift, no strain at cruise, and best of all, they could be marketed as tough, industrial, and reliable. Diesel wasn't just an engine choice. It was an image. Serious, efficient, European. GM wanted that image desperately, but there was a problem, a big one. GM had never built a modern passenger car diesel engine. They had truck diesels, they had industrial diesels, they had diesel expertise scattered across divisions. But a refined, smooth passenger car diesel V8, something that belonged in a Cadillac, something that could compete with Mercedes, they had nothing. And developing one from scratch would take years. 4 years minimum, maybe 5, maybe more. Years of engineering, years of testing, years of refinement, years GM didn't have. The market was moving now. Customers were buying now. Regulations were hitting now. So someone made a shortcut decision, a decision that seemed brilliant on paper, logical, efficient, fast to implement, and catastrophic in reality. Instead of designing a diesel engine from the ground up, GM decided to convert an existing gasoline engine. That engine was the Oldsmobile 350. On the surface, it made perfect sense. The Olds 350 was everywhere. Introduced in the late 1960s, it was a 350 cubic inch V8 with a 4.057-inch bore and a 3.385-inch stroke. It was smooth, compact, cheap to produce. Millions had already been built. The tooling existed. The suppliers were in place. The assembly lines knew how to build it. Production could start almost immediately. The plan was simple. Take the gas engine, strengthen it, lower the RPM range, raise the compression, swap the spark plugs for glow plugs, add diesel fuel injection, and boom, diesel V8. Engineers were given aggressive timelines. Program managers were given ambitious targets. Everyone was told to make it work. But here's what most people don't realize. A diesel engine is not just a gasoline engine without spark plugs. It is a completely different animal. The physics are different. The forces are different. The stresses are different. Everything is different. Gasoline engines rely on spark ignition. A spark plug fires at precisely the right moment. The air-fuel mixture ignites. Combustion pushes the piston down. Diesels rely on compression ignition. Air is compressed so violently that it becomes hot enough to ignite fuel on contact. No spark required, just physics, massive compression. That's the key to diesel, and that's where everything went wrong. The Oldsmobile diesel ran a compression ratio of around 22.5 to 1, 22.5 times the cylinder volume crushed into the combustion chamber. Compare that to the gasoline version's roughly 8.5 to 1. That's nearly 3 times the compression, 3 times the squeeze, 3 times the violence inside each cylinder. Every combustion event became an explosion. Cylinder pressures skyrocketed. Combustion forces slammed into pistons with incredible violence. Those forces traveled down connecting rods, into the crankshaft, into the main bearings, into the block, and most critically, into the head bolts. The head bolts hold the cylinder heads to the block. They keep the combustion sealed. They keep pressure from escaping. They keep coolant and oil where they belong. And this is where the nightmare began. The Oldsmobile diesel block was based on the gasoline casting. Yes, it got reinforced main webs. Yes, it got stronger internals. Yes, engineers tried to beef it up. But the head bolt design stayed dangerously close to the gas engine. 10 head bolts per bank, the same basic layout, the same bolt pattern, similar thread engagement, and not nearly enough clamping force. The math was marginal. The safety margin was thin. Engineers who ran the numbers knew it was close. Some reportedly raised concerns. They were told to make it work. They were told there wasn't time for major changes. They were told the market wouldn't wait. So the design went forward. At high compression with full combustion load, the heads would lift, just slightly, microscopically, not enough to see with the naked eye, not enough to hear, but enough to break the head gasket seal. And once that happened, everything unraveled. The failure mode was insidious. At first, nothing seemed wrong. The engine ran. It made power. It got good mileage. Owners were happy. Then small symptoms appeared. A little coolant loss, not much. Just enough to notice the reservoir dropping. A slight roughness at idle, barely perceptible, easy to dismiss. A faint, sweet smell from the exhaust. Antifreeze burning in the combustion chamber. Then the symptoms accelerated. Coolant leaked into the cylinders in larger quantities. Diesel fuel washed past damaged piston rings and contaminated the oil. The oil turned milky. Lubricating properties collapsed. Bearings washed out. Main bearings, rod bearings, cam bearings, all of them running on diluted oil that couldn't protect metal surfaces. Pistons scuffed against cylinder walls. Rings lost tension. Compression dropped. More combustion gases escaped. Crankshafts wore prematurely. Journals that should have lasted 200,000 miles were damaged at 30,000. Mechanics started pulling engines apart with less than 30,000 miles on them. Some failed at 20,000, some failed at 10,000. Some failed before the first oil change. Owners were furious. They had paid premium prices for diesel Oldsmobiles. They had trusted the GM name. They had believed the marketing about durability and efficiency, and now they were stranded on roadsides. Now they were facing repair bills in the thousands. Now they were being told their engines were destroyed, and it got worse. GM launched the Oldsmobile diesel in 1978 across nearly every division. This wasn't a limited experiment. This wasn't a cautious rollout. This was a full corporate commitment. Oldsmobile, Cadillac, Buick, Pontiac, even Chevrolet. The diesel engine appeared in sedans, coupes, and wagons. It appeared in luxury cars and family haulers. It appeared in vehicles ranging from the Chevrolet Impala to the Cadillac Fleetwood. Displacements ranged from the infamous 350 V8 to a smaller 260 V8. The 260 had its own problems, different problems, but the 350's reputation poisoned everything. The damage was already done. The 350 diesel made about 120 horsepower. In an era of declining power, that sounded acceptable. But the gas version of the same engine made more, and revved higher, and felt more alive. Torque was around 220 lb-ft, respectable for a diesel. But the delivery was agricultural, coarse, loud, vibrating through the steering wheel and floorboards. On paper, it sounded acceptable. In reality, it was painfully slow. 0 to 60 took over 13 seconds in some cars. Some tests showed 15 seconds. Some showed even longer. Passing on the highway was an act of faith. You pressed the accelerator. You waited. You hoped. The engine groaned. Speed built gradually, very gradually. Oncoming traffic became a concern. Merge ramps became adventures. Hills became enemies. But customers were willing to forgive slow. Slow was the 1970s. Everyone was slow. Nobody expected performance anymore. They were not willing to forgive catastrophic failure. That was the line, and GM crossed it. Then came the fuel system. Unlike gasoline, diesel injection systems demand absolute cleanliness. Gasoline is forgiving. A little water, a little dirt, the engine stumbles, but survives. Filters catch most problems. Carburetors tolerate contamination. Diesel is different. Diesel injection pumps operate at incredible pressures. The clearances inside them are measured in thousandths of an inch. Any water or contamination can destroy injectors and pumps. Water causes corrosion. Corrosion causes wear. Wear causes failure. Failure costs thousands. American fuel stations in the late 1970s were not ready for diesel cars. Diesel had always been for trucks, big rigs, farm equipment, commercial vehicles. Those operators knew how to handle diesel. They drained water traps. They monitored fuel quality. They understood the requirements. Passenger car drivers didn't. Water separators at fuel stations were rare. Fuel storage tanks were often contaminated. Quality was inconsistent from station to station. Some stations sold old diesel that had been sitting in tanks for months. Some stations had water pooled at the bottom of underground tanks. Some stations had never sold diesel before and didn't understand the requirements. The Oldsmobile diesel used a Stanadyne rotary injection pump. Stanadyne was a respected manufacturer. Their pumps worked well in proper conditions, in agricultural equipment, in trucks with knowledgeable operators. But the pump was sensitive, demanding, unforgiving. A little water in the fuel, and the pump would self-destruct. Internal components would corrode, precision surfaces would score, delivery would become erratic, then fail entirely. When the injection pump failed, repairs could cost thousands, sometimes more than the car was worth, and GM didn't clearly educate owners about diesel maintenance. The owner's manuals were inadequate. The dealer training was rushed. The marketing was all about benefits, not requirements. People filled them like gas cars. Pull up, insert nozzle, fill tank, drive away. They neglected water separators. Many didn't know water separators existed. Many dealers didn't mention them. The feature was buried in maintenance schedules nobody read. They used the wrong oil. Diesel engines need specific oil formulations, different additive packages, different viscosities. Regular gas engine oil would break down faster, would provide inadequate protection, would accelerate wear. They skipped glow plug warm-ups. Diesel engines need time to preheat in cold weather. The glow plugs heat the combustion chambers. Without that heat, cold starts are brutal. Owners would crank and crank and crank. Starters would burn out. Batteries would die. Engines would finally start, but with damage accumulating. Failures stacked on failures. Head gaskets, injection pumps, glow plugs, starters, injectors, bearings, blocks. Every system seemed vulnerable. Every component seemed marginal. Every mile seemed borrowed. By 1980, lawsuits flooded in. Not individual complaints. Class action lawsuits. Lawyers gathered thousands of plaintiffs. Stories piled up. Evidence accumulated. The pattern was undeniable. Dealerships were overwhelmed. Service bays filled with diesel cars waiting for repairs. Parts were back-ordered. Warranty claims overwhelmed processing systems. Mechanics hated the engines. They were difficult to work on. They required special tools. They failed in expensive ways. Some mechanics refused to touch them. Warranty costs exploded. GM was bleeding money on every diesel engine in the field. What should have been profitable vehicles became liabilities. GM tried to fix the problem. They revised head bolts, longer bolts, stronger bolts, better thread engagement. They updated head gaskets, different materials, better sealing. They improved water separators, made them more visible, made them easier to service. They issued service bulletins, stacks of them, explaining failure modes, explaining repair procedures, explaining maintenance requirements. But the damage was done. Trust, once broken, doesn't return easily. By the early 1980s, the phrase GM diesel was a punchline. Comedians joked about it. Mechanics told horror stories. Owners warned friends. Used car buyers ran from diesel badges. The reputation spread far beyond Oldsmobile. Every GM division suffered. Cadillac's luxury image was tarnished. Buick's reliability reputation was questioned. Even Chevrolet felt the effects. Sales collapsed. Diesel take rates fell from promising percentages to nearly zero. Customers who had ordered diesels canceled orders. Customers who owned diesels traded them in at massive losses. Customers who were considering GM looked elsewhere. Oldsmobile, once one of GM's strongest brands, never recovered. Before the diesel disaster, Oldsmobile was a pillar of General Motors, known for engineering innovation, known for solid quality, known for cars that customers trusted. The Rocket V8 had built that reputation over decades. The Toronado had shown engineering boldness. The Cutlass was selling in huge numbers. After the diesel disaster, everything changed. The brand's reputation for engineering excellence was shattered. Customers who had trusted Oldsmobile for generations walked away. The damage was permanent. Many historians trace Oldsmobile's slow death directly back to this engine. The brand limped along for 2 more decades. Sales declined steadily. Products became increasingly forgettable. By 2004, Oldsmobile was gone. A brand that had existed since 1897. A brand that had pioneered automatic transmissions. A brand that had been one of the best-selling in America. Gone. And it started with a shortcut in 1978. GM knew it. Internally, engineers were furious. Some reportedly warned management early on that the engine wasn't ready. They ran the calculations. They saw the margins. They knew the head bolt clamping force was insufficient. They argued that the block design was marginal, that more development time was needed, that rushing to market would be disastrous. But the pressure was immense. Fuel economy regulations were coming. CAFE standards were tightening. Every MPG mattered. Every diesel sold helped the corporate average. Market panic was real. Import brands were gaining ground. Every month of delay meant lost sales. Customers were buying diesels now, from someone else if not GM. Corporate pride was on the line. GM was the biggest. GM was supposed to lead. GM couldn't be left behind. Executives pushed engineers. Timelines were non-negotiable. Launch dates were fixed. Make it work. GM pushed it anyway. By 1985, the Oldsmobile diesel was quietly discontinued. No celebration, no farewell, no retrospective in corporate communications, just silence. One day it was in the catalog. The next day it was gone. GM wanted it forgotten. Press releases focused on new products. Marketing emphasized different technologies. The diesel years became something nobody discussed, but history doesn't work like that. The internet wasn't widespread yet, but enthusiasts had long memories. Mechanics told stories. Owners shared experiences. The reputation spread through word of mouth, and when the internet did arrive, the stories multiplied. Forums filled with diesel horror stories. Articles documented the failures. Videos showed the damage. The Oldsmobile diesel became a permanent case study in automotive failure. Even decades later, the damage lingered. When GM later introduced excellent diesels, the Duramax V8 in the early 2000s, for example, many American buyers still flinched at the word diesel. The Duramax was a completely different engine. Clean sheet design, developed with Isuzu expertise, properly engineered for diesel forces. Reliable, powerful, efficient. But dealers reported resistance. I had a GM diesel once. Never again. I don't trust them. That fear didn't come from Europe. Europeans loved diesels. Europeans trusted diesels. Europeans bought diesels by the millions. The fear came from 1978, from rushed engineering, from broken head gaskets, from engines that died before their time. And here's the cruel irony. The Oldsmobile diesel could have worked. The concept wasn't flawed. The idea wasn't crazy. Diesel V8s were possible. Mercedes proved it. Peugeot proved it. Others proved it. But they did it right. With a clean sheet block designed for diesel forces. Stronger headbolt architecture from the beginning. Proper fuel system education for owners and dealers. More development time to catch problems before production. Mercedes took years to perfect their diesels. Decades of refinement, continuous improvement, patient development. GM tried to do it in months and paid the price. A price measured in billions of dollars of warranty claims. A price measured in millions of lost customers. A price measured in one destroyed brand and several damaged ones. Today, surviving Oldsmobile diesel cars are rare. Most were scrapped years ago, traded in and crushed, parted out and forgotten. Some have been rebuilt properly with aftermarket fixes, better head bolts, improved gaskets, proper fuel system maintenance. The problems are solvable with knowledge and investment. A few dedicated enthusiasts keep them alive as rolling cautionary tales. They understand the engines now. They know the weaknesses. They address them proactively. These survivors run reliably. They get good mileage. They prove what the engine could have been. But GM doesn't celebrate them. There are no GM Heritage Center displays featuring Oldsmobile diesels. There are no restoration programs. There are no retrospective documentaries. GM doesn't mention them, doesn't acknowledge them, doesn't discuss them publicly, because this engine represents something far worse than a mechanical failure. It represents a betrayal of trust. Mechanical failures happen. Engineering mistakes occur. No company is perfect. But this was different. GM didn't just sell a bad engine. They sold an idea they weren't ready to deliver. They sold reliability they couldn't provide. They sold durability they couldn't guarantee. They sold efficiency that came with a hidden cost. Customers believed them. Customers trusted the GM name. Customers paid premium prices for diesel vehicles. And GM let them down. Once trust is gone, it never fully comes back. You can apologize. You can improve. You can build better products for decades. But somewhere in the back of every customer's mind, there's a question. What if they cut corners again? What if they're rushing something? What if this is another diesel? That doubt is the real cost of 1978. That's why this engine still matters. Not because it was the worst engine ever made. There have been worse engines. Engines that made less power. engines that failed faster, engines with more fundamental flaws. But few engines damaged a company's reputation so thoroughly. Few engines killed a brand. Few engines changed how an entire nation viewed a manufacturer. The Oldsmobile diesel showed what happens when shortcuts replace engineering, when timelines trump testing, when market pressure overrides technical concerns, when executives push harder than engineers advise. GM survived. They're still here, still building cars, still one of the largest automakers in the world. But the scar never healed. And even today, buried deep in GM's history, the Oldsmobile diesel remains the engine they regret building, and the one they can never truly erase. Somewhere in a junkyard, under weeds and rust, an Oldsmobile diesel sits. Its block cracked, its heads warped, its story forgotten by most. But not by everyone, because some lessons are too expensive to forget. If you enjoyed this deep dive into automotive history's darkest corners, let me know in the comments what engine or rivalry you want to hear next. And make sure to subscribe, because the next story is even wilder.